The long wait for Euro 2020 is finally over. In the build-up to the big kickoff, we are doing something special. We have scoured the Twitterverse to find a representative from each of the 24 nations competing in this summer's European Championships. We will be recording a preview with each representative who will be sharing views on their nation's hopes and expectations throughout the tournament, and most importantly, the fantasy assets we should be looking out for. Welcome to Euro 2020 Happy Hour. Hello and welcome to our Euro 2020 preview series with myself, Sham, otherwise known as FPL 2 Guys 1 Cup on Twitter.
And myself, Rob, otherwise known as FPL Panda.
Rob, we've got another guest tonight, and they are representing a nation that are the current holders of the Euros, and that is Portugal. And Shez, welcome.
Hi guys, thanks for having me on.
How you doing?
I'm well, thanks. How are you both?
All good.
Yeah, I'm good.
What are you laughing at, Rob?
I've just got the giggles tonight.
Yeah, we've had to re-record the opening like 3 times because I kept on laughing. So anyway, Shez, tell us about yourself. What football team you support? What you do, if you like FPL.
Sure. So I'm a big United fan, general football fan, and I'm into FPL as well. I think I may have beaten you, Sham, this year, but we won't go into that. But no, all things football, and of course Portugal, my pride and joy.
For those that don't know, I'll quickly say, me and Shez used to have a podcast together. You might recognize his voice we used to have the FPL 2 Guys 1 Cup podcast. And so it's nice to have you on, Shez, representing Portugal.
Yeah, it's a bit weird for me because you two guys were like the first podcast I listened to when I first started listening to podcasts. You were one of the first. And so I'm like sitting here feeling like, am I a bit of a third wheel here? Like,
not at all.
You're the guest on your two show.
No, Sham upgraded me.
Obviously. Right. Shez, talk to us about Portugal. So how did you guys do in qualification?
So qualification was a slow start. We drew our first 2 games to Ukraine and Serbia. So it didn't start very well. But from there on, we played pretty well. We came second in the group overall, and that's predominantly because we lost to Ukraine away 2-1. Disappointing. You would expect Portugal to be topping this group. And that essentially has resulted in the group that we're facing in the Euros now.
Okay, so the qualification didn't go great, but how did you guys do in the Nations League, and how have you done in the recent World Cup qualifiers? Because obviously, though the European qualifications was quite some time ago.
More recently, it's been mixed as well. So we lost to France 1-0 November last year, November 20. We beat Croatia 3-2, and that was the Nations League games. And then in the World Cup qualifiers, we beat Azerbaijan 1-0, and we drew Serbia again 2-2.
Okay, so I guess over the last couple of years since the qualification, and then the Nations League and the World Cup qualifiers, who have been your most kind of important players? Because obviously when you won the Euros some time ago now, your main player was kind of Ronaldo, and it felt like that was all that there was to that side. It was Ronaldo kind of carrying the side. Is that changed, or is it the same sort of feeling?
I mean, it's changed to the extent that we've got a much stronger squad. So I think in 2016, Ronaldo did everything, and don't get me wrong, he still does pretty much everything. So we scored 22 goals in the qualifiers, and Ronaldo scored 11 of them.
Right. Okay.
So we are still heavily reliant on him. But if you look at the rest of the squad now, we've got strength all over the team, from the keeper, back line, midfield. We've got real depth, which we previously didn't have. which is positive, because I mean, I think in 2016 we stumbled across the group stages. We got through as a third place team. We didn't win a game in 90 minutes until the semi-finals against Wales. But this time round, I actually feel more confident.
Yeah, I was going to say, it feels like almost, you've got a better squad than you did in 2016. And actually, should you be more confident that you could win it again?
We certainly have a chance. But part of the issue of Portugal is our biggest strength is also partly our weakness. Ronaldo is now 36 years old. So relying on a 36-year-old to score most of your goals is always dangerous, although I know he sort of defies age slightly. And also in terms of our back line, Pepe was immense in 2016. He's 37 years old.
Wow, okay, yeah. So very much an aging team.
We've got those two that are aging, but then we've also got some very good young players coming through. Ruben Diaz of Man City, who's sort of 24. And we've got a few of the Sporting boys. Pedro Gonsalves, who is 22, I believe. He hasn't been capped, but he's been phenomenal this season. He scored 23 goals in the Portuguese league, and they won the Portuguese Liga.
Okay. So before we go into like the detail of some of these players that are important for Portugal, what would you say the main strengths and weaknesses of the side are? Would you say it's the defense or attack, or where should potential fantasy managers be looking at? Not in terms of players, but in terms of positions.
So this is where I think we've got strength all round. Defensively, I don't expect us to concede many goals, particularly with a partnership of Ruben Diaz and Pepe potentially. Midfield is strong, but that's potentially not necessarily somewhere to look for within fantasy. There are one or two players which we can go into, and then attack, obviously Ronaldo. I mean, the guy is just a machine, so it's difficult to look past him.
Okay, so let's talk about the main players for you guys. Again, not from a fantasy perspective, but from an in real life. Ronaldo aside, because we'll talk about him in a couple of minutes. Who else is important to this side?
So Ruben Diaz, he's the linchpin of the back line, and he's pretty much a guaranteed starter. Well, he is a guaranteed starter.
He was immense for City this year.
He was immense. So, if Portugal are going to have a good tournament, he's going to need to be solid, because he's going to have an aging centre back next to him.
Yeah.
Within midfield, there is likely to be some rotation, particularly on that central midfield part. But further up the field, I expect to see goals, and not just from Ronaldo. Bernardo Silva contributes a lot more to Portugal than I believe he does for Man City. He gets a lot more advanced, and he contributes to assists, goals, etc. So he's definitely someone to look at as well.
Okay. What about Jota? Is it because I've noticed he's scored quite a few goals for Portugal recently? Would you say he's an important player for you guys?
He certainly is. So he wasn't heavily involved with the qualifiers, but more recently he has played, and in his last 2 games he scored 3 goals.
Okay.
Obviously he is just coming back from injury, and his place in the side isn't guaranteed. So that's the only thing to be aware of. But if he does start and he does, have a run of games, then he will certainly be getting some goals.
Okay, so let's talk about Ronaldo then, the talisman. I normally ask the question, what does he bring to this side? But I feel like with Ronaldo, it's almost like a stupid question.
What doesn't he bring to this side?
What doesn't he bring to this side? Yeah. How important with his age now is Ronaldo to Portugal? Is he a has-been, or is he still like really important?
I think with Ronaldo, he's the one player to an extent you almost ignore his age. He was top scorer for Juve, top scorer in Serie A this season. He scored 29 goals. Everyone said Lukaku had a phenomenal season. Lukaku only scored 24. So he got 5 goals more than Lukaku. He's just a machine. The way he looks after his body. He's 36, but he's almost in the body of like a 32-year-old.
Yeah.
I mean, you could argue that this might not even be his last major tournament. Like, if he keeps himself in this shape, you'd think he's going to be in Qatar.
Absolutely.
Because I think he's still got 2 or 3 seasons at a top level in him. You look at him and you can't see, 36-year-old man, can you? You can just see someone that's like still at their peak of like their form and their sporting career. You can't see him retiring. He's just brilliant, and he has been for the best part of 15 years now, probably more than that. Almost probably closer to 20 years since he went from Sporting to Man United, and he's just brilliant to watch. And it's great that now, like you said earlier, this Portuguese side, there seems to be a lot more better players within the squad that can actually help him, so he doesn't have to almost carry the team. I think at previous tournaments, you've kind of seen him not get weighed down, but you could tell that there's this huge pressure on him to produce. And when he hasn't had that support around him, it's maybe found it difficult at times at the big tournaments. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I think we saw that in 2016. We were relying on him, and he did carry us all the way through to the final. And even in the final, when he got injured, I mean, he was still running the show from the sidelines. So.
Manager Ronaldo.
Yeah.
You mentioned off air that there's a couple of youngsters from Portugal, and you mentioned that in terms of the squad is going. Not necessarily again from a fantasy option, although they might be, and we'll talk about that soon. Tell me who these youngsters are that our listeners may want to kind of watch out for and listen, who had a good season this year.
So there's a few youngsters from Sporting, and the reason I'm mentioning the club specifically is because they won the Portuguese league this year. So they're coming into the Euros ultra confident. They hadn't won the league for 19 years, and so I think that only benefits the national team. So there are a couple players. There is a young kid called Nuno Mendes who plays left back, and he started the last 2 games for Portugal in that position. Really versatile, can play left back, left wing back, left midfield, left attacker, pretty much anywhere on the left side. It's got huge potential, so he might get a start. There is Pedro Gonsalves, who has replaced Bruno Fernandez at Sporting, and he's scored 23 in 32.
Wow.
In his first season. So incredible. The he hasn't been capped by Portugal yet, but he's been selected for the squad. So if he gets a chance, if someone like Bruno isn't performing and this young kid gets a chance, he could do really well.
Interesting. Okay, before we move on to fantasy options, then let's look at the group of death, because that is what everyone is calling it. France, Germany, Portugal, and we won't talk about Hungary. What are your thoughts of this group, and how do you get out of it? Where do you sit within it?
It's not ideal. Yeah, I mean, I guess Portugal are sort of paying the price for finishing runner-up in the qualifiers. Look, it is the group of death. There's no getting away from that. I think Portugal are fortunate in a way that the fixtures have fallen. So we've got Hungary first, and you would expect Hungary to be the whooping boys, although we did draw with them in the Euros. We drew 3-3 with them. So there's no guarantee that we're gonna beat them easily.
But if you go into that game and you don't get a win, you're shitting it. Like, you don't win against Hungary and then you've got France and Germany to go. Do you think that's like added pressure that you think would be good for Portugal, or is it a case of that's a non-option really?
Generally, Portugal perform better when they're under pressure. They always make things hard for themselves. So pressure is not necessarily a bad thing, but I'm not sure we want to go into the France and Germany games needing 2 victories.
Yeah.
But saying that, I do expect us to beat Hungary. We then have Germany next, and I think that's the key game for Portugal.
Yeah, because we spoke to the Germany rep actually, and he said that Portugal don't have a good record against Germany.
No,
that
we don't
in
at all.
recent
No.
times that Germany have always beaten Portugal?
We always struggle against Germany. We've actually got a better record against France than we do against Germany. But saying that, I would expect France to top this group. So I think it's between Portugal and Germany, between who comes second. That's why I'm saying that second game is key. But I think it's worked out well for Portugal in a way, because if we can get a victory against Hungary, and let's just say even a draw against Germany, if France have won their first two games, they may potentially rest a few in the final game.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
That's interesting.
even 4 points from those first two games, that you're going to be in the round of 16. Like, no matter what, it'd be just whether you finish second or third behind France. But if they've already qualified, maybe they rest a few players. You stick out the big guns and try and sneak away with a win and top in the group with the win. If it all worked out like that. But I'm not sure whether if Portugal got 4 points in the first two and France got 6, I think Portugal might players like Ronaldo you'd probably give him a rest, wouldn't you? Possibly. But yeah, that second game I think is the key one for the group. There'll be a lot riding on it. More so maybe for Portugal, because Germany have got that third game against Hungary, which they've got as their backup maybe. I don't know.
I guess it depends what happens between the French and France-Germany game, because if France beat Germany, then Germany can't afford to lose to Portugal.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting group. Bearing in mind you've got sort of 3 of the sort of top 5, 6 favourites in the same group.
Yeah. I guess the good thing is you can come third and still go through, right? I think that's the positive thing out of this. If you couldn't come third, then that would be shit. Like, that would be really tough to get out of.
I think the tough one in this group with coming third is that it is going to be low scoring. And I think at the last Euros when they brought this format in, the 5th and 6th worst teams in third place only went out on goal difference, and it probably could mean that game against Hungary is actually the key one for whoever's finishing third in the group, because it could be whoever scores the most against Hungary that finishes third. No, that finishes second.
I've always seen, and I don't know if this is just bias or anything, I've always seen Portugal as a side that have been solid at the back but low scoring, generally 1-0, 2-0 wins, not kind of 4-1, 3-1 kind of. Would you say that was like in the past, and actually now with the new players coming through, the Jotas and Bernardo Silvas and that front three with Ronaldo there, actually you guys are you can score a lot of goals, because you did mention that you think the threat is there in attack?
I'd agree with both points, actually. We are certainly more structured. When Santos came in, he sort of changed the whole DNA of the team, and he made us sort of defensively stable. So we don't concede too many, and previously we didn't used to score too many. But now with these attacking players, if we get an early goal against Hungary, I can see us scoring quite a few.
Interesting. Okay, let's look at fantasy then now. Now, I guess 2 questions before we go into some detail on some players. Firstly, are there any players here that when you look at the squad, you think are out of position? So any players that play in midfield but actually listed as defenders, and vice versa, etc., with forwards?
So none in terms of defence. Midfield, Danilo Pereira will be playing holding midfield, but we've only taken 3 centre-backs. So if we get any injuries to them, he'll drop into the back line. And he's done that a few times this season for PSG. The other players who are sort of potentially out of position are Jota, João Felix, and Bernardo Silva, because we'll be playing almost a 4-3-3. So they'll be essentially supporting Ronaldo up top. So you almost consider those more as forwards rather than midfielders. so that there's some value there.
Kind of like the Salah and Mane thing in
Absolutely.
FPL. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, interesting. And are there any players here that you look at and you think, wow, they're well overpriced or well underpriced?
Overpriced, probably Bruno Fernandez. And people will be probably thinking, why is he saying that? Because he's incredible for United. The difference is he's the talisman for Man United. For Portugal, he's not. That's Ronaldo. Ronaldo takes the penalties, any sort of free kicks within distance of goal, Ronaldo will be taking them. So Bruno's involvement is a lot less, and he plays a little bit deeper as well. So for 10.5, he's certainly overpriced. Underpriced, you have got Nuno Mendes, which is the 4.5 million defender. Now, the caveat with that is he may not be starting. He started the last 2 games for Portugal, but I don't expect him to start. I'd expect Guerreiro to start.
Okay. So I guess, is it waiting for what happens in the friendlies over the next kind of week, and then that will give you a good indication as to who will start? Or you think Guerreiro definitely starts, really?
I'd be surprised if he doesn't, but I think the friendlies will certainly be an indicator. I would say about sort of 8 to 9 positions within the team are pretty much fixed, and there are maybe 1, 2, or 3 which are up for grabs.
Okay, so I guess whilst we're on that subject, then what positions are fixed? Which players are fixed, and which ones are kind of undecided at the moment?
So Patricio should be in goal.
Sorry, just before you answer that, what formation as well do you normally play?
So it's going to be sort of a 4-3-3, but obviously Bruno slightly ahead of the 2 in midfield.
Okay.
Yeah.
So almost a sort of a 4-2-3-1, but not quite, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So keeper will be Patricio, the Wolves keeper. Defense will be Cancelo at right back. It will be Ruben Diaz. The other centre back is slightly open because both Pepe and Jose Font are both really, one's 37, one's 36. So there's no guarantee that any one of them can play.
I didn't even know Font was still playing. Bloody hell.
He won the French league with Lille this season.
Wow, I didn't even know that.
So
they're wheeling him out for the Euros.
So it should be Pepe, but again, there is scope for rotation there. And then left back, as I mentioned, it should be Guerreiro, 6.5 million. In terms of midfield, now this is where there are a few places up for grabs.
I was going to say, because your midfield options, when we've been doing these podcasts, this midfield option looks like taking up the whole screen. It's like, oh my god, where's all the midfielders? Why is there so many?
I mean, we've already touched on like the likes of Jota and Felix, that you'd argue they're forwards. I think it's like the fact that there's only 2 recognised forwards, as it were. But yeah, the quality as well in that, like the selection of midfielders, it's just vast. Like, who starts then?
So it should be Danilo Pereira in sort of holding midfield. The one next to him, this is sort of an open position. I think in the first game, we will go with Moutinho, simply because we'll be looking to attack Hungary, and Moutinho is a playmaker. He brings other players into the game. Bruno Fernandez in front of them. And then we'll have Bernardo Silva on the right wing. Left wing is another open position. It's either going to be Felix or Jota. Okay. And the thing is, we just don't know, because Felix hasn't really been playing for Atletico Madrid this season, and Jota's just come back from injury.
And then Andre Silva up front with Ronaldo on the bench, right?
Absolutely.
I think it's interesting, like with the people that have done the pricing, that they've priced Felix and Jota exactly the same. I think they don't know either, because normally someone would be 0.5 more or something. just to kind of make a difference. But yeah, they don't know who's starting out of those two, and they've both got like fours and like pros and cons on either of them starting. I think, yeah, you probably argue maybe Felix slightly ahead of Jota because of fitness and the good season in the La Liga with Atletico as well.
I think so. But there have been games where we've played with both of them. So one of them plays in the Fernandez role in the centre, and that's usually Felix, and then Jota on the left. So if he's feeling brave, he could do that. But I'd be surprised if we start like that. I think to an extent he'll be wanting to start the first game almost as a preparation for Germany and France.
Yeah, get the win, but also be prepared for the big two games that are left to come.
Yeah, absolutely.
So who do you think are the main options then for this Portugal side? Where do I start in terms of who you believe there's a kind of that pool to pick from?
Fantasy perspective?
Yeah, from a fantasy perspective.
So Guerrero, the left back, 6.5 million. I appreciate he's very expensive. And is that possibly the most expensive defender in the game? I don't know. I don't think we've got a 7 million defender, do we?
No. There's a few 6.5s, but no 7s. So
he's really attacking in the Bundesliga this season. So he plays for Dortmund. In 27 games, he got 5 goals and 10 assists.
Wow, that's a lot.
So it's 1 in every 2 almost.
But where you're saying that you've got Mendes at left back, but you're not sure because this guy started the last 2, but you expect Guerrero to start. Do you think that is not worth the risk at 6.5?
I would risk it for Hungary. I think he'll start. I would be very surprised if Mendes does start. 6.5, even if you're benching him, it's the last game of that match day. And I appreciate 6.5 is a lot to have on your bench, but I think it's a game that he could do particularly well in.
Interesting. Okay, yep, go on.
So that's possibly the only defender I would consider. You've got Diaz for 6 million. He's scored a couple of goals recently, but he's not really known as a prolific goal scorer. It doesn't really get any assists as a centre back. In terms of midfielders, there are 2 that I would consider. Bernardo Silva, he's nailed on the right-hand side. And he was the second highest goal scorer in qualification behind Ronaldo. He only scored 3 goals, but that shows you how many goals Ronaldo scored. But he got 6 assists. So he's good value at 8.5. And like I said, when you see him play for Portugal, he seems to be getting a lot more into the box compared to when he does for Man City. So definitely Bernardo Silva's one to consider. The other one is Jota. Now, obviously, as we mentioned, there's a risk with this. We don't know if he's going to start, whether it's going to be him or Felix. If he does, we've seen what he can do for Liverpool.
Yeah. It's really I mean, I think everyone wants to know about this Portuguese side because no matter what the strategy is that you've got with the chips, you're going to be having 3 of these guys. Well, you want 3 of these guys in, targeting that first match day. Get yourself off to a flyer, and yeah, I think it's trying to pick 2 that complement that 12 million price tag of Ronaldo, so that you're not.
Yeah, I guess
you're not
is Ronaldo a must?
Absolutely.
I think for that first game, it's special. I mean, my thoughts at the moment in the other game that I'm playing is Ronaldo, where there's no chips. So I'm getting Ronaldo, and then I'll be moving him on for Mbappe, and then moving him on for someone else, like following that Hungary fixture, basically. And I think even if you weren't planning to use a chip in match day 3, I think everyone probably used one in match day 2. But match day 3, it's an easy move from Ronaldo into one of the other premium players that have got an easier game. So that you don't have to face him off against France. Although if Portugal are chasing a win and France are sort of got one eye on the round of 16, he could be a potential captain option again. We've seen him come up with the goods against the top sides before.
If we get wind that Jota is going to be playing, do you think that he can be enough instead of Ronaldo, or is he as well as Ronaldo?
I think it's as well as.
Okay.
The reason being, it's Ronaldo. He's a machine, and there are records which he'll want to break, particularly in the Euros. So he's 6 goals away from Ali Dair's all-time goal scoring record. So bearing in mind, the most he's likely to score against France and Germany is maybe one each. That's 2 goals. He gets a hat-trick against Hungary. That gets him through to the knockouts. And then even if he gets 1 in the knockouts, he's broken the record. I think that's what he's going to be going for.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we all know what, I think, and it's deservedly so, the man can have an ego. But he's fed off that ego for his whole career, and it's just made him better and better and better. And if that's his target, or one of his target, his first target will be to win the tournament with Portugal. But one of his other targets is going to be to break that record, get it out of the way, and then he can start again in the autumn by extending that record. I wouldn't put it past him breaking that record in this tournament. And he could potentially just do it in the group stage. If he has a good day against Hungary. And it's the fact that we know that he's going to take free kicks. We know that he's going to take penalties. No one else is touching them, are they? So, really, I don't think it's one of these cases. Oh, can I, with Salah and Mane, can I cover Salah's returns by getting Mane instead? I don't think it's like that. I think it's very much you'd be looking at a player from another team altogether to try and cover those returns.
Absolutely. I think Portugal are a little bit unique from that sense, just because Ronaldo is a greedy bastard. So he's not going to.
Which other 2 players then are you looking at personally to get as well as Ronaldo?
So I think for match day 1, I'd probably have 1 defender. If you're concerned about the risk of Mendes starting, then you could go for Diaz to be safe, or Cancelo. Yeah. The 2 of those will be starting. You could go Bernardo Silva. He's nailed on.
Is that who you're going to be going for?
I'd probably go for Bernardo, Ronaldo, and Guerreiro.
I think it's a good moment to say that Pep is nowhere near the Portuguese team, so Cancelo can't get rotated. Telling FPL managers to bring Cancelo in for match day 1, and then he gets rotated out, and Santos decides that Semedo should start. It'd just be hilarious. I was looking at Cancelo actually as. I know we've just said about trying to cover Ronaldo, but do you think he would cover Guerreiro at 0.5 less? Because he does. We've seen he provides an attacking threat. He might have been unlucky for City this season, where he was rotated a lot, and then just those 50-50 shots and crosses weren't going in for him. Do you think he'd be worth it?
He's an option. I think I would either fork out the additional 0.5, or I would go cheaper and either go Pepe. He's likely to start at 5 million. So you'll either try to bank the clean sheet at 5 million, or you go for Guerreiro and hope that he can get some attacking returns on top of the clean sheet.
Is Cancelo as attacking for this Portugal side as he usually is for City?
He is attacking, but it's slightly different. I think with City, he sort of cuts in and almost becomes an additional midfielder.
Right. Okay.
For Portugal, he's more of a traditional right back.
Okay. So just to go over what you discussed in terms of fantasy options, and if I've forgotten, just let me know. So Ronaldo is a must, basically, in terms of how much he delivers for Portugal, and then good options are Bernardo Silva. Did you say Felix was an option or not really?
It depends whether you feel he's going to start the first game, and then that's the difficulty. We don't know whether Felix or Jota is going to start. That's why it's a real punt, and I'd probably stay away from that. I would go Bernardo Silva.
So really, in midfield, the only real option as a guaranteed starter that's worth getting is Silva.
Yes, if Bruno Fernandez was cheaper, then I would say him, but not at 10.5.
Okay, and then Guerrero is a really good option at 6.5 because he's attacking. Is he on? Who's on corners for you guys?
So it'll be Moutinho and Fernandez.
Okay, interesting. Rob, have you got any other questions?
Yeah, it's just tough with, like, I think we've got unlucky in a fantasy way with the way that the draw's gone, and that these teams are going to be playing on the last day of each match day. So you're literally going to be, they'll be playing the day before the deadline in the previous match day, and you, like, for match day 2 and match day 3, and so there's not even going to be a press conference you can rely on for any of the info. You're just going to have to look at the friendlies, and I think for me that means that Felix and Jota for match day 1 are a no-go, and which probably then means they're a no-go until the round of 16, which I may come back and look at them depending on how they've done in the group. It's just I think it's a shame really, because that first fixture you just want as much info as you can, and all we're going to get is 2 friendlies, one of which, like the second one, is on Thursday evening or Wednesday evening, so it's it feels really close to the tournament, and they might not even play at full strength to start off with, so you don't learn anything at all. It's just tough.
Shez, just quickly before I forget, you mentioned a couple of youngsters. So you mentioned Mendes, and then you mentioned the sporting midfielder. Was it Gonsalves? Yeah. Does he start? Do you think that he will start?
No,
after having a good season.
He hasn't been capped, so I'd be very surprised if he just came straight in. It's one of those that if Bruno doesn't have a good tournament, if he doesn't play well against Hungary, this kid could be given a chance, but I can't see him starting against France and Germany. It's one of those that if we get through to the knockouts and we have a reasonable fixture and he's playing well, then you consider him. But otherwise, it's a bit of a risk at sort of 7 million.
Okay. Shez, is there anything else that you'd like to add that we've forgotten, either fantasy related or Portuguese related?
No, I mean, I think, we've talked about Ronaldo, and, he is expensive, but I think you are running a risk if you don't get him in for match day 1.
Okay. Rob, any other questions for Shez?
Who do you think's going to win it? If it's not Portugal, who's going to win it?
I was going to say, if Portugal get through the group, I think they can go pretty far. I think France will win it. I think with Benzema back, he'll propel them to the title.
And who's getting the golden boot? Is it Ronaldo? Ronaldo for the golden boot, or do you think Benzema or Mbappe or Harry Kane?
I think it'll be between Ronaldo, Kane, and Benzema.
I've got my punt, Gerard Moreno. Gerard Moreno. 6.5 million. That Spain rep sold me. He sold me. Raul sold me. Moreno had a really good season. I think he's a really good shout if Spain can do well. they can do well. Right.
We'll end the Portuguese pod talking about Spain.
Shez, thanks for joining. Really appreciate you coming on, and both me and Rob both appreciate it. And I'm sure all the listeners will as well. For all the listeners, thanks for tuning in. Please like and subscribe, and look out for our next installment. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Cheers, guys.
Rob, we've got another guest tonight, and they're representing a nation. Oh, can we restart that?
It's going to be a long night.
I've only done that like
you haven't fucked up you haven't fucked up an intro yet.
Hello and welcome to our Sorry, just making me laugh already.
I'm going to make a cup of tea.
I've kept all of this recording, so I'm keeping this. Right.